Welcome to RevOps Revolution, where we focus on changing the game for driving revenue. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and each episode we take a look at the different areas that affect change and drive revenue across your organization. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episode. Here's to the revolution. Welcome to another day of the revolution. I'm your host, Jesse Morris, and today we're going to be exploring a really hot topic all about the function of RevOps and what should fall underneath it. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I'll say, the ideal scenario and then reality, and how those two things can work together. So I'm really excited to walk through this. This is a topic I get asked about a lot. I was at a networking event last night, and this was a hot topic. It was actually the very first question that people asked me when I walked in was, hey, how is your RevOps function structured within your company? What falls under revenue operations? And what do you think should fall under it? And maybe what shouldn't? And so today we're going to explore a little bit more about that and see what that could look like. And so this topic, there's not a silver bullet. There is definitely the ideal scenario that I'm going to talk through, and then I'm going to go a little bit into other considerations, really important considerations when you're building out your revenue operations function within your organization. So let's dive in today. So in the happy path of revenue operations, there are two fundamental non-negotiables to me. And then everything else beyond that, I think there's a case to be made, and there's pros and cons like there is in any company of having functions report up under revenue operations. But the two areas that are non-negotiables are systems and data. So systems, internal systems, business applications, whatever you want to call it, and data, business intelligence, analytics, however you want to reference that. Those two components are non-negotiables. Why? Because you can't have one without the other. And having two teams that work seamlessly together for the ultimate end goal, which is providing insights and help driving revenue for the company, come out of those two areas. Hands down, full stop, no question. So to me, those are two components that really need to be married together when looking at an organization. And when we talk about systems and data, I can get into the nuance of should that be all systems for the company or just go-to-market systems? And is it all data for the company or just go-to-market data? In general, and I'll say in general, depending on the size of the company, I think it's most systems that affect outcomes within the company. So what I mean by that is I do think, servicing financial systems is very beneficial for sales because the quote to cash or lead to cash process obviously affects that. The HR systems, I think that could go either way, but I actually think there is some value in having it with the sales or revenue operations function, because ultimately, your ability to kind of holistically look at all of us are in the business of selling for the company. Like no matter what your role is, whether you're in HR, whether you're in engineering, like all of it's focused around driving revenue. Like we're building products to drive more revenue. We're getting more efficient to drive more revenue. So I think there could be a case there. I don't die on that hill at all. But really when I talk about systems, I really mostly mean all kind of go-to-market in areas that affect go-to-market. So, like your legal process and all of your legal systems definitely need to be under revenue operations. Obviously your marketing, your sales systems, and then really all of the kind of ancillary that support the go-to-market functions. But really anything that kind of touches lead to cash, and then also the renewal support service process that potentially affects upsells, all of those systems should fall under revenue operations. And then on the data side, the data team has to have access to all of that. And then in SaaS, which is what I am an expert in and work a lot in, utilization data. And that's like the big mountain that everybody tries to get to and very few companies ever get there. But getting really quality utilization data drives an insane amount of value for the company. And a lot of that is working with product and engineering, R&D, to get that out of there. But that data being centralized under RevOps is imperative. And so those are the fundamental pieces within revenue operations that have to exist, in my opinion, for RevOps to even be a thing, to be very blunt. And that might be an unpopular opinion. These are my opinions. This is what I've seen work really well. And then outside of that, let's talk through some of the other departments that I would say ideally roll up. But then I'll talk about the different reasons where I could see nuance within that. So data and systems, no question. The next piece is sales compensation would be another one. The sales enablement would also be another one that you could make a very strong case for that following up. No question. Obviously, I should have said the other one as well. Sales operations, field operations, that also should fall under revenue operations. That feels like a no-brainer to me. So maybe it's really three, but that also would roll up under revenue operations. And then there's some other ones like and marketing operations. I also think marketing operations belongs under revenue operations, but there are some caveats to that. But I really believe sales ops, channel ops, and marketing ops all should fall under RevOps. I mean, those are, like, by definition, those are revenue operations. And so to me, that's not overly debatable, but I've got some examples that I can think of where it made sense to not necessarily move them. So I'm talking about, like, if you're building this from scratch or you're working towards an end goal, these are all the functions that should roll up under revenue operations. Now, there's a couple other ones that we'll talk about, deal desk being one of those. And deal desk really into two parts. One around, I'll say, the quoting and discounting process, and then two, the close process. The quoting and discounting process, I believe, does and should fall under revenue operations, and pricing along with it. So wherever pricing sometimes sits in product, sometimes it sits in finance, sometimes it sits in revenue operations. I do think there's value in it sitting in revenue operations because they're the ones ideally doing the quotes. Obviously working with the other parts of the org, product being a big voice in that discussion. But I do believe pricing also should follow deal desk. Like, I feel like those things are one and the same, especially the front end process of deal desk. And then secondly, the close, I'll call it close pending is the stage I always refer to it as, but it's really doing all the checks and balances before it actually goes in the system and is considered bookings. That piece of the process, I actually think it belongs more in finance. I prefer it in finance. Now, you could make the case that that's all part of deal desk, and, deal desk should fall under revenue operations. Personally, I really like finance being the final checks and balance before something officially gets booked into the system. I think there's just something about kind of the separation of church and state, for lack of a better word, of having an outside party that is responsible for the numbers at the end of the day, to do the audits, to do the checks. Now, RevOps can really help with that process using other tools and technologies to streamline it. But personally, I think it really is valuable having finance be the one that ultimately says, yes, this is a booking in the system, which then triggers compensation. And so compensation, again, could either fall under revenue operations or it could also fall under finance. I don't have an overly strong opinion here. If I had to pick, I do think it's valuable sitting under revenue operations, but we're working very, very closely with finance on it. On the end of the day, they have to sign off on it. But the reality is our ability to hire top talent, and really go after our goals. A lot of that is in comp plans. And so I do think there is value in it sitting in revenue operations. But at the end of the day, if finance, feels like they should own it, I am all for that. Sometimes it makes our lives a lot easier on the revenue operations side because that's a really hard role. So all of you sales compensation analysts out there, you have a lot of job security because it's such a brutal role to be in. And so thank you for all your hard work. Those are really the major areas when we look at it. The last area I'll talk about is value engineering. So value engineering, you're hearing that term more and more frequently. That could sit under SEs, like the SE team. I think there's some value in that. It also could sit with marketing. And I think, marketing obviously has a lot around messaging, and it could sit with revenue operations. So I'll bring that up because I've seen that be a more and more frequent topic recently. I could see value in it sitting with revenue operations because part of it is like ROI calculators and automating really ways to show what is the value that we are doing for our end customers. But I also think marketing has a great voice behind that, no question. And then I also think SEs also know the only challenge with SEs is, they might not be as good at presenting it like marketing. You could say the same thing for RevOps. So there's pros and cons around value engineering, but I like to bring that up as a consideration point because it is something that all companies should be thinking through right now. I think it'll become more and more prevalent as we move forward. So those are the different really functions under revenue operations. So again, you've got data, systems, and then all of the kind of support people within the revenue operations function, which is marketing ops, sales ops, and channel operations. All of those to me are like non-negotiables. All should fall under revenue operations. And then really outside of that, you've got deal desk. And again, kind of the quoting and pricing side of deal desk, which again, I think the pricing should also sit with that. Whoever that team falls under, I think should fall under RevOps, but falls there. And then I do think the other end of deal desk, which is really the close one pending and checks and balances, all that I think should belong under finance. And then obviously value engineering, as I talked about, I think could fall under marketing, finance, or software engineering, the SE team, or sorry, solution engineering, not software engineering. And then lastly, enablement. So enablement, I definitely feel its best places in revenue operations. Sometimes though, it's a little hard, right? Marketing is really well positioned to help with that. And so is the SE team. So I think it could fall between any of those three organizationally. But personally, I believe, a lot of the role of revenue operations is to help drive revenue for the company. And one of the ways to really drive value and revenue is ramping reps and rep efficiency. And that directly is correlated to enablement. And also the reality is a lot of the systems work we do requires enablement. And so there needs to be a ton of alignment between those two things. But again, not a hill I would die on. And so that's really like functionally kind of the major areas within revenue operations, to take a look at. The nuance here is this. And so I've kind of painted utopia. I want to talk about reality for a second. So one of the big things that we as leaders and just revenue operations in general is all about ROI and value to the organization. So I talk about this a lot. It's less about building systems for system's sake or building, showing great visuals for data's sake. It really is all about driving value for the company. So I don't view revenue operations as a cost center. I actually view it as a revenue machine to really optimize and maximize the capabilities the company has at driving revenue. So that's my view of the world. Take it for what it is. And so within that lens, when you're starting at a new company, it's easy to come in and say, okay, I want all of this real estate. I want all these different functions to fall under me. It's really good for our resumes. So let's just call that what it is. It's great experience. And I do think it's in the best interest of the company long-term to have that. With that said, though, we also have to balance of fixing the most important things and getting quick wins right away. And so I'll give you a great example. My last company I was at, marketing operations fell under marketing when I joined. And it would have been really easy for me to be like, oh, that's a revenue operations function. It has operations in the title. This feels like a no-brainer to me. It's a major system of the company that integrates with all of the other go-to-market systems. And again, I do feel that strongly about it. But in this instance, it was working really well. The leader was awesome. And the head of marketing was also great. And so it was one of those areas where it was kind of a no-brainer to me to be like, let's just not touch that. Like, it's working well. There's a myriad of other things we need to fix. Let's leave it be. I think long-term, the best interest of the company would have been to move that over to revenue operations as we'd fixed a lot of the underlying things. Because again, I think the synergy there is just really crucial. But I think in the short term, that's not a hill to die on. And so I'd like to mention that tension, if you will, of kind of ideal scenario versus quick wins and value. And there's no reason to mix something up if it's working really well. And that's across the board. So a lot of those other functions, obviously I talked about in my non-negotiable areas, but sales compensation is another one of those. Sales enablement's another one of those where if they're working really well when you join a company, there's really no reason to rock the boat because there's so many other things in the world I work in, which is always, SaaS companies up to about 250 million. and they're typically high growth, or they're really focused, they've acquired a myriad of companies. And so we have a ton of problems to solve. And so I'm always going in as a problem solver. That's my type of role. In that scenario, I don't need to add more to my plate typically. Ultimately, what I need to do is get the areas that aren't working well, working really well. And then I can go back to the business and we can have a conversation as the business of what's in the best interest long term. And so I think it's just something to always be aware of, is it's easy to get sucked into this idea that, we have to have it a certain way. This is the only function, the way I like to do it. But that's not always the case. And so I'd encourage you guys to just think through, what are the quick wins? How do we establish value? How do we quantify ROI? Like, that's a big thing I spend a lot of time in, is like, what is our actual dollar impact to the organization? And I can cover that in other episodes of how I help quantify that. But that, at the end of the day, should be the North Star. We all as a company want to win. And we want to really drive things forward for the company. So hope this was a helpful overview of the different functions that can roll up under revenue operations. If you've got other ideas, thoughts, I am all for and open having discussions. All of these have pros and cons. Challenges associated. Moving marketing ops, for example, under revenue operations can be challenging because, it doesn't sit under marketing. But just like any other area of the business, we're here to support. And so we need to figure out how to do that more effectively. But hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, if you haven't liked and subscribed, please do, so you can follow along for more episodes. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.